All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you so much for watching, for listening. However you consume Talking Buffalo, I truly appreciate you. Big shout out to our sponsor, Sunny Reds, 1841 Abbey Road, just on the way from Highmark Stadium. Brand new outdoor patio. Beautiful time of the year to have it too in the summer here. If you haven't been there, make sure you go check it out. And of course, Imperial Pizza, 2 locations, one on Main Street near Canisius College. The other one, the South Buffalo staple, 1035 Abbey Road, home of the best lunch special in town. All right, good one coming up today, folks. I am joined right now by Lance Lysowski of the Buffalo News, and by habit, I almost said Buffalo Sabres beat reporter for the Buffalo News, Lance Lysowski, but not the case anymore. Now it is Buffalo Bills. We'll get into that plenty more. What's going on, Lance? How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, Pat. Thanks for having me. No, I'm still getting used to it too, so don't worry if there's any slip ups with the title there.
I got to tell you, man, and again, we'll get into this a little bit. We're going to have a little bit of some Bills and Sabres conversation as well. Not too many things that I read about or hear about when it comes to sports media that kind of take me back a little bit. I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. This was definitely one of them. And we'll get into that in just a few minutes. Before that, I got to tell you, I don't even know if you remember this story, but indirectly, you were involved with one of my great, and in all the years I've been back in Buffalo now and or living here, and discovering places that I didn't know existed or things that I didn't know existed that were really good. You and I did a show a little over 4 years ago. You were not new, but you were settled in at that point to your job at the Buffalo News. You and I met at Beltline Brewery in Larkinville. And generally, when I do a show with a guest, a sports media guy, and we do something live, it's always was at previously a place where I've had the wings before. I know they're good. And I feel confident that even if it's a guest who's never been there before, that I can be like, listen, I trust me, these are going to be good wings. You and I hooked up there, and I had never eaten there before. I had no idea, just like you. I don't know. I don't think you had either yet at that time.
No, I've been back several times since, but I had not. Yeah,
right.
I had not been when we met up that night.
Right.
I can't believe it's been 4 years, by the way.
Well, jeez, I know. I was looking it up, man. You've been in Buffalo now for almost 7 years.
Yeah,
it doesn't feel like that sometimes. Still feel like a newer guy here, but absolutely not the case, man. You are seasoned now when it comes to Buffalo. But anyway, yeah, that Beltline Brewery experience, man, I won't forget it. It was just regular. I think it was 716, which is their regular wing sauce, and we had those all dressed wings. And holy shit, man, those were to this day some of the best wings that I've had anywhere in Buffalo. It's one of those places I think they're starting to get more well known, but it's still kind of like one of those secret, low key, elite wing spots, man. But yeah, so you do remember that as well, then?
Oh yeah, no, I'm lucky with the 2 live shows I did with you. We got to go to Beltline and Imperial, so yeah, you can't go wrong there.
Yeah.
No, Beltline's really good. Not enough people. There are so many spots in Buffalo that there are some under the radar ones. So I always appreciate when you do a list or anybody else that kind of reveals some of those hidden gems that are around town. Yeah, no, that's one that always stands out, and I've gone back, several times since.
Me too. But that was my first, and again, I was surprised because I did not know what to expect. Now, you've been here back in Buffalo, or you've been in Buffalo, I should say, not back in Buffalo, but now you've been in Buffalo for almost 7 years. Is that one of the things that you've noticed? I mean, I know you know by now, Buffalo is a town with a lot of pride that's built with food. You know what I mean? Places to go, restaurants to go. Have you been surprised during your time here at how many places you can go to just to get a good bite to eat? It don't have to be wings or pizza. I mean, there's so many different things, but like Buffalo, if nothing else, is an endless supply of cool dive bars and cool places to go and get your eat on, right?
Yeah, no, I heard that coming, before I had moved here. I just telling people that I accepted a job in Buffalo. I heard great food. It reminded me, and that pride, that passion, how much people love the local places around town reminds me of where I came from, Youngstown, Ohio. There's just
Mm.
really good restaurants there. A lot of it because it was a town where a lot of immigrants moved there. So you have a lot of great Italian food, Greek places, whatever you want, you can find it. And I could give you a list of 20 spots that I just love going to. You got to have some restraint because it'd be easy to eat out 5 to 7 days a week when you live here. But there are
Yeah.
so many great places from, a place like Left Bank, Mothers. Living in North Buffalo now, we always go over to Moran, Burning Buffalo on Hurdle is great. I could just go on and on. But yeah, North Buffalo too. And then being able to explore and find new spots. And now that I'll be in the South Towns a lot more often, sort of branching out and seeing what's available down there as well.
Have you had an opportunity? Are you enjoying your summer here, which for you is a little bit different because your summer vacation is kind of cut short a little bit? You remind me of my son, by the way. All right, so my son, when we moved to Florida from Buffalo in 2016, and I'll get to the point of what I'm talking about here.
Okay.
So in Buffalo, school goes until late June for kids, and then it starts in September. In Florida, school ends by the end of May, which is awesome. It's a full month before. However, school starts at the very beginning of August, a full month before. So my son got screwed a little bit out of his vacation in 2016. He went from graduate or being done with school at the end of June, moving to Florida. By the time we got settled in, like 2.5 weeks later, it was going to go right back to school again. So he never really got a summer vacation. I'm saying this because, as everybody knows by now, Lance finished up covering the Sabres this season. And typically a hockey guy, you work through like the draft, first couple of days of free agency, and then you're chilling for a while, man. You got plenty of time to just relax. Not really the case with you because you go from hockey to football, which is literally going to be starting training camp here in a week. And again, we'll get to all those details in just a second. But anyway, the little bit of vacation time you've had or whatever, you had a chance to enjoy this summer. The weather finally, it seemed like it was never going to be nice here, but now it's been awesome, man.
Yeah, the biggest challenge was sneaking those weeks, sneaking the vacation time in while also writing training camp preview stuff and still
Mm.
trying to get your feet wet and do all the preparation and the research and all the due diligence you need to do to get ready for camp. And also, my wife works for Buffalo Public Schools. So
Mm.
her time off is usually in August because she works in the summers. So that's usually when we take our vacation. So we've had to be a little creative now to, with the switch, but we made it work. We drove to Massachusetts for the 4th of July weekend to visit her family. We're going to New York City this weekend as a final little getaway before camp starts. I got to Myrtle Beach with my dad to visit some family back in May. So, hey, you get it in. That is the time off, the summer. That is the least of my, I wouldn't say concerns, but I would just say
Right.
challenges or maybe just changes to what the normal day to day looks like and really just preparing during the summer.
Let's kind of get into this a little bit. All right. So, like I said at the top, it was a surprise to many, including people inside the sports media,
Yeah, I've heard.
to learn that you were switching from covering the Buffalo Sabres to the Buffalo Bills, of course, staying at the Buffalo News. Let's kind of go back to the fall of 2018. This is something that is not brand new to you because you've done this before. I remember our conversation when you first got to Buffalo, fall of 2018. You came to the Buffalo News. You were covering the Pittsburgh Pirates before that. You were covering baseball. So you went from baseball to hockey. Now that you've been here and you've done it for, like I said, for a long time, and now you're going to be switching again. Before we get to that, kind of talk about the memories from what you can remember coming from baseball and covering the Pirates to coming to Buffalo and covering the Sabres to begin with, going back to 2018.
Yeah, pretty surreal to look back on it because I remember, I would be remiss if I didn't thank Josh Barnett for believing in me and hiring a baseball writer to come cover a hockey team
Yeah.
in Buffalo, since it is a very important beat that the paper puts a lot of resources into. But yeah, I mean, I remember taking the job. The first thing I did was I read the CBA and I took a bunch of shorthand notes. I did as much research as I could. So the process now is basically the same that I followed then with a little bit more, nuance and more depth to it. And I'm extremely lucky that I have 3 beat partners who have been covering the NFL up to, with Ryan O'Halloran, and he's been doing it for, I think, 15 to 20 years. Jay Skursky's been on the Bills for how long? Quite a while.
Yeah.
Catherine Fitzgerald, before she came here, she was covering the Arizona Cardinals. I have Vic Carucci I can go lean on. Even I was at Mark Gaughan's house last week to really start to learn the way that he took stats during games and the database that he did, and really just leaning into those resources. So I know that I can do it, and I've come, I'm over the past 7 years covering the Sabres. Not only have I learned this market, but I've become a much better reporter. I am a much better writer. I know how to approach a beat day to day, because even though I covered the Pirates, I mean, Pat, I did it for a year and change. And before that, I was on Pitt football, Pitt basketball while doing a lot of GA work. So in Pittsburgh, I was helping out. I was at Steelers training camp in 2016 and 2017. I was helping out during playoff games, doing the locker room. I was doing Penguin stuff. I was doing everything there. So I hadn't really gotten the chance to really get into a beat and be there every day and build sources and build relationships. So really, I think the biggest challenge, or the biggest, it's checking your pride, right? Because I worked so hard to establish myself on the Sabres beat and build sources and build trust with readers and get to know the players, right? I mean, and again, we have such an advantage at the news with travel.
Mm.
Again, I think it is something that gets overlooked in sports and media nowadays, because so many outlets have dropped travel from, even the Washington Post, or the Dallas Morning News. They're not traveling the way they used to, but it is so important to be on the road, and being there, you build relationships with those players. And the thing about hockey, there's only 23 players. So it is very easy to get on a first name basis with everybody you're covering. So I think the part is just checking your pride and realizing that you are in some way starting over. And I think it was very easy for me to say yes to this opportunity. It's extremely exciting. It's a massive challenge that I'm ready to take on, and I'm going to get better through it. But at that same time, it is reminding yourself that it is okay. You're going back through a learning process. You're starting over in some ways. And instead of building relationships with 23 players, you have to try to do it with 53. And in training camp, it's even bigger than that. And plus all the people who work for the team, from the PR staff to the coaches to the general manager. And that is something that takes time. And Pat, I'm not the most patient person. So it's just it's continuing to remind yourself that it's a process, and putting your nose to the grindstone and just getting to work the way that I did when I got here.
First of all, the travel comment that resonates with me. That makes a lot of sense. It is really how you do build relationships in those type of settings, especially when you're one of only the few people that are even there to begin with. You know what I mean? To where cultivating, like you said, the relationships with those players. And I also like this, the kind of, like, it's almost like going back to school when you switch fields. You know what I mean? Or not even, like I said, you're still with the same media company, but you're doing something different now. So it's kind of like going back to school, like you said, and relearning things with nuance. I want to talk about with the Sabres, okay? Can you explain to people listening some of the difficulties that come with, in this case, the Sabres and yourself covering them, the difficulties that come with covering a team that just always loses? And I listen, especially when you work for a mainstream outlet, everybody knows this, man. You're not a cheerleader. It's not affecting you personally whether they win or lose. You have a job. It's different. I get it, as opposed to a fan. But that said, when a team loses all the time, I can only imagine, because you were there every day. The attitude of players and the coaching staff, and sometimes maybe media relations or whatever, it could get a lot surly when you lose, and it just, over time that really changes a person. So you got the attitude from certain players, at least anyway, I'm sure, just continuously losing and being frustrated, to, of course, the fans that are always negative towards the team, which, in complete fairness to the fans at this point, have a very good reason. But just, could it be difficult sometimes to just cover a team that always loses, even if you don't have a horse in the race, so to speak, emotionally, with rooting for a team to win or lose, but just the frustration that you had to deal with between players at times and interactions with fans? I mean, I see it on social media, you and Mike all the time, other reporters. It's not a fun place to be when you got a fan base that's just sick of losing, and it could get ugly. Explain that part of the job. How it could be. I would assume it would be difficult.
It's a really good question. I know we're going to touch on this, but I will state right before I answer your question that it wasn't why I decided to move beats. I know we'll get into that.
Hmm.
Yes, it is challenging for several different reasons. The players, I will say, this group in particular, the team the last couple of years, they're great to deal with. I wouldn't have a bad thing to say about one of those players. And Pat, if you would have asked me that same question about the team in 2020, I would have had a few things to say about a couple of the players
I
behind
bet.
closed doors. It's a great group. Yes, they were beaten down. They were tired of losing. And it didn't surprise me at all that somebody like JJ Paterka would have asked out. It's not the same, though, as it was back in 2020 when you knew that it was a toxic environment. That wasn't the case. And I think Lindy brought a lot of leadership from that coaching position that wasn't there back in 2020. So there's that. I think that yeah, the fan base frustrations can be tough because you're constantly seeing on social media, no matter what you write, no matter what you share, it's gonna get eye rolls. It's gonna elicit a certain type of reaction. You learn after a while, though, you have to ignore that. I think that the biggest thing is that it limits the types of stories you can write because people want analysis. They want to know why this is going wrong. They want to know what this problem is with the roster. And you really have to keep asking yourself, what do fans want to hear about? What do they want to know? You can't be doing certain features because it's not going to resonate. It's not the kind of coverage that they want in that point in time. And the access never changed. I will say that. The only thing that really changed was the general manager didn't talk as often. Back in 22, 23, 21, 22, those 2 years, Kevin Adams was very transparent with the media. We would have off to the side conversations before practice starts where he would give clarity on this roster move or that. I thought that was very beneficial to him and the organization to frame the reason behind their decisions, what their plan is. And I think that communication really deteriorated and broke down as soon as there were expectations that team didn't meet. He took things personally. He took the coverage personally. He took the dialogue around town personally and sort of pushed the media aside and created, space. And I think that really led, and maybe they don't see this, and this is on Kevin, that he didn't understand that it really you lose control of the narratives, and they got back into that spiral that happened before he took over. You think back to 18, 19, even 17, some of the problems that were with the organization. So it was extremely fun covering that team. And I know that my days being around them and writing about them are not over. I'm sure when they make the playoffs again, they'll have me in that press box with Rachel Lindsay and Mike Harrington at some point in time. But yeah, it was. You're writing for one of the best fan bases in the NHL. People can roll their eyes at that all they want, but if you saw how many people read our work at the Buffalo News, how much they engage, this is an incredible fan base that just deserves better. And it's just one of those problems that it's going to be difficult for them to solve, but it's not for a lack of talent, or at least it hasn't been the last couple of years. So we'll see what happens.
I just get to a point where it could get. I can't imagine what it would be like to be like working for, say, the Sabres social media. Okay. And their job is to kind of hype up the team, you know what I mean? And just always be positive. They're not objective reporters, obviously. But when it gets to a point where you cannot tweet out happy birthday to a GM or a head coach or a player or especially, God forbid, the owner on his birthday or something like that, just don't, I guess you can't read the replies. That's what it comes down to. And in your case, when you were just talking about, I'm going to be honest with you, Lance, man. Don't get me wrong. You're probably right, and I sure hope you're right. But when you talk about the Sabres making the playoffs someday and you being back in the box with Rachel and Mike, writing some stories, I'm like, well, is that going to be on the 20th anniversary of Talking Buffalo? Or I have Lance Lysowski out with me because it feels that way right now.
I totally understand that because of the way they've approached the last couple off seasons. I've chronicled all of the decision making and everything that's gone into how this current iteration of their rebuild and this plan has fallen apart. Right.
Yeah.
And they've been forced to pivot the last couple of years. Part of that was hiring Lindy Ruff, a coach who was drastically different than Don Granato, which in turn is going to lead to issues with their roster because you had players who were brought in to play for Granato, whose system and approach and everything is so much different than Lindy Ruff that it's just going to further delay your trajectory, your timeline to win. And I hear this all the time in the business, and it is true. You either want to cover a really good team or a team that is so bad that they are very interesting. The Sabres are always interesting. There is never a dull
Sure.
moment on that beat, from the press conferences to what you see during the games, the calamity. I wish for the fan base. I wish for this city, because you hear the stories about 06, 07. You hear the stories about what it was like when this team was good, and you see I will say, like, the players in that room deserve it too. Like, Darlene puts everything into it. Like, that is a really good group of players who pour everything into it. And it's not for, you had bad attitudes in the past. You had guys who didn't want to be here. You had guys who were so upset about the fans booing them or whatever. And you had some of that a year and a half ago with a certain former captain. But now, like, it's a good group that wants to win, and they want to do it for Buffalo because they see the reaction from the fan base and the people in the community to the Bills' success. So we'll see if they can figure it out. It's been an interesting offseason. Well, I don't know if it'll be enough.
Let's get to the question that I've been waiting to ask you, and I know a lot of people want to know about. Look, in sports, sometimes I'll give you an example. During an off season, like let's go back to say 2022, probably had about 50 free agency preview episodes, and you feel like you cover every possibility, every scenario that could possibly happen. And then out of the clear blue sky on the ticker, Bill signed defensive end Von Miller. And you're like, what? Bill signed Von Miller? You know what I mean? It's just the surprise, because you feel like you had everything covered, but then something comes that throws people for a loop. Sabres fans obviously been locked in with you now for years when it comes to Sabres coverage. So I'm going to ask you, as much as you can or are willing to, kind of take us behind the scenes a little bit, take us behind the process. How did this come about where Lance Lysowski goes from being the Sabres beat reporter to now shifting over and working covering the Buffalo Bills? What was that process? How did this go down?
No, thanks for the opportunity to explain it, because there is a personal component to it that I haven't been exactly able to reveal. When I announced this on social media, I just wanted to put something up to get it out of the way, and I was still sort of processing not only the decision, but what was next, what the next few months were going to look like. So, and I'm not somebody who's very self-important. I just, wanted to get it done and tell people what the next step was for my career. But it really is. It goes back the last 2 seasons covering the team, and has nothing to do with the team's performance. Trust me. In late October 2023, my dad had a stroke. My dad's 64. He's single, lives alone in Ohio. We have no family in the area, so I had to drive there, miss a road trip. Thankfully, Mike Harrington was very gracious and took the trip to Philadelphia for me, and had to get him to the hospital. I was there for about a week, and for several months I was driving back and forth to get him to doctor's appointments. Eventually he was diagnosed with cancer, which caused the stroke. And when something like that happens in your life, you see a family member going through a health challenge, and admittedly, Pat, I was, there were times throughout the last 2 seasons I was getting burned out. I would get sick for a couple weeks at a time. I had bronchitis once, and you just start to question, is this really the right thing for me anymore? The travel component, waking up at 3 a.m. to catch a flight, game days. I don't know if people really understand that. You go to the morning skate. You have to write off the morning skate. Usually you have, some sort of podcasting in between. You're back at the arena. You're writing multiple game stories, and then you're waking back up at 3 a.m. the next day to go to the next city. And, it was a thrill. I'm so grateful, thankful, however you want to put it, that I had that opportunity, and it really helped advance my career. It helped me really establish myself as a trusted voice on that beat and throughout the NHL. But it comes at a cost. And, I've been doing this. I've been traveling extensively for work for 9 years, because before this, it was the Pirates. So you're doing spring training and the entire 162 game season. Prior to that, it was not only full travel for Pitt football and basketball, but I was also doing GA work. While I was doing some Penguins games on the road, I was doing Pirates games on the road. And, I had a health challenge in the spring of 2017 where I had to have a significant surgery. And I never really took the time to consider the cost, because I had just been pursuing this goal for so long, since high school, to reach this point in my career, to become a pro beat writer, to be doing it every day with travel. And I just got lost in that pursuit and sort of put my own physical and mental health on the back burner for so long that one, my dad had his diagnoses in that 23-24 season. It made me really stop to think about, is this what's best for me in the long term? And what is next? Because I didn't see it as something that was sustainable, or at the very least, I needed a break. And when I got married last summer, that's another layer to this, and you start thinking about starting a family and the demands of the job while trying to be present as a father and as a husband. And at some point, I started to wonder, oh, well, I love this job. I love being there every day. I love the people, from the security guard who lets you into the parking garage to the security, to everybody that you interact with every day, for the most part. That it was tough to really wrap my head around it. But when the offer came, Mark on had decided he was going to retire. It felt like the right time. It felt, as much as it was so easy to say yes to that opportunity because it's the National Football League. I grew up playing hockey. I grew up watching hockey. It's a passion of mine, but I also grew up watching football. And
Mhm.
in Youngstown, Ohio, football's huge there. And then I covered high school sports in Southwest Pennsylvania. I covered college football, and I really loved it. So it was very easy to say yes to covering one of the best teams in the NFL with the best fan base in the National Football League. The challenging part was coming to terms with what that meant. And it's not just, the opportunity and the challenge that was ahead. I will take on any challenge. I've learned throughout my career that it is best to always bet on yourself. Don't put your career and your fate in the hands of anybody else. Bet on yourself. So as much as it's, you've got a lot more reporters on the beat, there's a lot more reporters traveling, there's a bigger roster. You could easily get overwhelmed if you try to think about all of what it's going to take to get to where I was on the Sabres beat. But, it's, doing it at 35 years old and doing it at this stage of your career after you put so much into being as good as I was on the Sabres beat. Like, I was far from perfect. There are a lot of different stories I wish I would have written. There's a lot of different things that I wish I would have done differently, from podcasting to writing, whatever it may be. But in the end, this is what was right for me, personally. And at some point in my profession, like, I sacrificed so much to get here. From my first job I was making $29,000 covering high school sports in Southwest Pennsylvania, and didn't have a social life because you were just grinding. You were just trying to
Yeah.
work your way out of that place. And at some point, I had to put myself and family first. And the time finally came. But also, that doesn't mean I'm not going to be committed all into Bills. It just means I won't be traveling as much for this beat. And that may not seem like a lot, but it certainly is after I did it for 9 years.
Yeah. Well, above all else, let me say this too. As somebody, you came to this market a little bit green, not having covered the NHL before, and,
Yep.
over these last 7 years or so have really kind of solidified yourself as a very trusted voice in this market. I congratulate you on that above all else, man. There are a lot of people who've really come to like and respect the work that you've done through the years. I'm talking about Sabres fans, of course, here, and
Yep.
even through a gloomy, what seems like it's going to be a never-ending drought. That's the way it feels a lot of fans. Like I said, you've been a trusted voice that somebody can read and or listen to on a podcast and gain valuable insight from. So congratulations on a great job covering the Sabres. I'm happy for you to join the Bills market as well. Before we get to a break, let's talk briefly about who's taking your gig over now. Of course, you still got Mike Harrington there, because there'll be some people like, oh shit, man, it's not like the Buffalo News hockey coverage is going anywhere. You know what I mean? You still got Mike Harrington, of course, and now Rachel is going to be moving over, and she's covering the Sabres. Just talk about her for a minute or two and what she's bringing to what she's going to bring to the table.
Well, thank you for that kind words. And Rachel, her work speaks for herself on the colleges beat. That is not an easy task to juggle those colleges while also handling some high school enterprise. She has a hockey background through the Portland Pirates, covering them earlier in her career. she can take on difficult news stories and really really form it into a very interesting narrative and inform readers and do it in a way that's engaging. So like our coverage, yeah, there's obviously going to be a transition like there is for any reporter changing beats, but she's got Mike as a resource, and Mike, I can't explain enough how much he helped me answering certain questions, how to approach this, bouncing ideas off each other. I'll miss having that dynamic, because it was very helpful to have, of course I have three people now, but with Mike, who'd been around it for so long and has a different way of looking at how you approach certain stories or how to approach difficult moments on the beat throughout the season. It's going to be she, the beat is in good hands. I can tell you that for sure. And they did a great job covering the draft and free agency, and looking forward to seeing what they do during the season.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a real quick break. Coming up, much more with Lance Lysowski. All right, back here with Lance Lysowski of the Buffalo News, who is now covering the Buffalo Bills. Let me ask you this real quick before we get into any Bill stuff, too. The first time you get to watch a Sabres game and you have no, it's not work to you now. You know what I mean? A Sabres game. You could take in a Sabres game, whether you're at the arena in the stands or whether you're just watching it home with the wife on TV or whatever. It's going to feel a little different to you watching a Sabres game, knowing that you ain't got to write nothing afterwards.
No, I'll still be forming leads in my head. It's sick. Yeah, it's twisted. But yeah, no, it was painful. It was painful watching all the roster moves and the draft and free agency unfold, not be able to write anything. It is not easy. But no, in the same token, I'm still going to watch every game that doesn't, I'll still watch every game. Let's face it. And I'm still going to be reading everything that's out there, especially our coverage, of course, and listening to everything that's out there. So no, I'm still interested. I'm still, unfortunately, that's how we're programmed. When you're doing this long enough, I was doing that with Bills games last year when I wasn't even covering the team. I do it when I'm watching any sport. You're thinking about what would you write off of this game? How would you approach, this story?
Mental reps.
Yeah, that's you can frame it as that, sure. But yeah, a sickness, however you want to frame it. But yeah, no, I'll still be thinking of it in the frame of work, but that's okay.
Yeah. So like we talked about before the break too, so you switch over to a beat and it's kind of like going to school again, and you're learning some things and you're going to work on, cultivating relationships with a different team and different media and all that. How much are you looking forward to training camp starting? It's kind of like, I always use sports media and kind of use a football analogy somehow. Like you've been at you've been at training camp right now, and pretty soon the season's going to start. Your season, I'm talking about, not the team season, but actually getting there and covering practice every day and being at St. John's Fisher for the next handful of weeks. How much are you looking forward to being able to dig in and start to actually get to work? I mean, it's not, you've been putting out stories and stuff, but it's different. Yeah. I'm talking about the physical aspect of being at camp.
Yeah, it's very different. No, I'm very excited, but I'm also nervous. I'm nervous anytime I cover an event for the first time, whether it be like my first NHL draft or like anything. And I got to the point with the NHL where I'd covered everything at least once, except for, the games in Prague were a first for me. But since then, I'd done everything at least once. Now, well, I didn't do a playoff game, but that's another story. That's a story for another day, unfortunately. Yeah, no, I'm really excited because yes, I did rookie mini camp, I did OTAs, I did mandatory mini camp, but you're not there every day. It's so broken up, and you can't. There's no rhythm to it when you're only there one day. You're one day a week, and then there's time in between. It's weird. It feels awkward, especially when you're trying to really get your feet wet and get integrated and get a feel for how you want to approach the job and what your role is going to be. So being at training camp, doing it every day, getting into the rhythm of it, and just immersing yourself in it is going to be extremely beneficial. I'm really excited. I've tried to fill the time in between and the awkwardness the last, couple of months or whatever. I've been trying to immerse myself in different ways, whether that's reading. I've watched every game from last season and taken notes. I've fiddled around with how to do stats or what process is going to work best for me, and just taking advantage of the time that I have now to prepare, because I don't want to get to August and regret, well, should have done this in May, should have done that. No, like every day I'm doing something, whether it's reading a book, reading as many news articles as I can, digging into next gen stats to find out how I want to tell a different story. And it's been fun to really write different kinds of stories, whether it just even be a position preview. So you get the opportunity to go through and watch some film with NFL Pro, which is such a useful tool, or going through and seeing what stat works best to provide context for this type of an article, or writing features. So yeah, no, it's really exciting. I can't wait for it. Yeah, like my summer, whatever you want to say, my off season's coming to an end very soon, but I honestly, I couldn't care less. I'm the type of person, I get a little stir crazy if I sit around too much.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I'm sort of addicted to work in some ways, as you can tell. But so I'm much more comfortable being busy, because I think being busy and being proactive and doing everything you can to try to be the best that's what keeps me going. That's what's kept me in this business for 12 years. That's what kept me through the days of covering high school sports in Southwest Pennsylvania. Is just that desire, that pursuit to be as good as I possibly can be at this job.
Well, one of my favorite takeaways, I'm sure, as I listen back to this, and I know a lot of people who are going to listen to this, that they'll appreciate from you today, is kind of giving good insight into the preparation that's involved in doing the job. It's not, you go to a game and you watch the game and here's the game story. It's not it's not that simple. Or going to a practice. So I'm looking for something that I can write about at this practice. All right, I found it and I'm gonna write it. The preparation mentally, and sometimes I guess physically too, that could go into covering a team. That's gonna be something I think that people are gonna listen to today, and it's gonna resonate. And another thing I like is I feel like you essentially just said that when camp first starts, being a little having nerves at first as camp first starts, that first practice, when you go out there on the field and it's live, and being at OTAs and mini camps, one thing, but when you got fans, a couple hundred fans in the stands are going to be going, nuts, like it's a Super Bowl for the most simplest execution of a football play with no pads on to start the season. You're going to have some butterflies for a hot minute, right? And
For sure.
Okay,
No,
you're
I'm
okay
not
to
gonna.
admit that.
I'm not going to sleep the night before. I will sleep very poorly the night before. That's how it goes. That's part of it. But once you get through the first day, you'll feel a little bit better the second
Sure.
day. Get through the second day, you'll feel a little bit better on the third day. And
Mm.
at some point, I'd say probably a couple weeks in, you get to the state where you're comfortable, you're sleeping a little bit better, and I always go in with a plan. And so it's not that I'm just going in and flying by the seat of my pants. You got to go with a plan. You got to have the ability to pivot when something comes up or a better story, falls in your lap, or you notice something. But at the same time, I'm going into this, Pat, knowing I don't know everything. Like,
Right.
I don't have everything figured out. But I'm going to figure it
Sure.
out through work and competing. I think that's what it comes down to. Another part of this job that I really enjoy is the competition. And you could look at the Bills beat and you see you see several great reporters. There is a
Mm-hmm.
lot more competition, and I'm not saying anything. There's just more people who cover the team, so there's more
Yeah.
competition, and
Yeah.
and that part of it really excites me, and really just gets the juices flowing, and makes me want to. Yeah, there's going to be nerves, but it's also going to be attacking it and making sure that I'm doing something every day to make myself better.
Well, I'm sure your preparation and your experience covering professional sports and switching sports in your career is definitely something you'll be able to draw from. All right, in our last handful of minutes here, let's actually, putting the media stuff aside, well, not the media stuff aside, but you switching and becoming
Yeah.
a Bills reporter now, what are a couple of storylines coming up here over the next handful of weeks or so at training camp and into the preseason? What are a few storylines that you're really looking forward to covering or seeing unfold?
Let's do first. First off, Hard Knocks. It may not
Yeah,
seem like much, but the Bills, they didn't want this, And Sean
right.
McDermott even said in the spring, he was concerned. He wanted to make sure that they used the spring to their advantage, to make sure that everybody was built those bonds, that camaraderie, that his group became a team before they arrived in Rochester and all those cameras and microphones were around them.
Mhm.
There's confidence there. Obviously, they have their leadership group. Their culture's been in place for a while now. You talk to guys around that team; they have zero concern, but it's still something that I think is going to be noteworthy, right? And seeing how they handle that spotlight, because it's very different than anything that they've faced to this point. Two, James Cook's contract. What's that going to mean? I still think he's going to report the training camp. Does he participate in all the drills? Do they pay him? What's their plan going to be for him? Is he going to get more snaps this year? Are they going to lean and really, with him entering the last year of his deal, if they're not paying him, are they going to be using him more? Because hey, we don't have to pay the guy. If he breaks down, we've got Ray Davis, we've got some depth. That's going to be an interesting one. The youth on defense. You look at the defensive line. Are they going
Yeah.
to be able to rely on TJ Sanders, Landon Jackson, Deion Walker on the defensive line? Is Joey Bosa actually going to be healthy since he got hurt in the spring and wasn't able to participate in OTAs or mandatory mini camp? Do they have enough depth at linebacker? Is their safety going to be good enough? Is Maxwell Harrison going to be that number 2 corner, or hey, even maybe a number 1 corner that they've needed to pair opposite Christian Benford? Cole Bishop. There are so many. Yeah, there's not a whole lot of competition in training camp other than roster spots, backups, who's going to be second string D tackle, who's, the pecking order of the depth chart. But there's still a lot there that is going to make this a very fascinating training camp, because you got a team that's dealing with Super Bowl expectations, a lot of youth on that defense, as Sean McDermott has pointed out, and an offense that is going to have to replicate what it did last year with some new pieces, whether that be Elijah Moore, Joshua Palmer. Is Dalton Kincaid going to have that breakout people have been waiting for? Is the offensive line going to be able to stay healthy like they did a year ago? So as much as, some people might say a contender like the Bills are boring as far as training camp goes, there is a lot there.
I'm going to let me throw a potential surprise storyline at you. I think, and this is what I think, and I don't think it's going to make people happy. And I think ultimately, let me preface this by saying, as long as he stays healthy, ultimately he's going to win the job anyway. But I think there is a sentiment that Cole Bishop and Taylor Rapp are your starting safeties, and that's the end of the discussion. I buy it with Taylor Rapp. I do not buy it with Cole Bishop.
That's fair.
I think you're going to see, to some extent, an open competition at safety alongside Taylor Rapp between Cole Bishop, Damar Hamlin, and maybe even Derek Forrest. Kind of like last year where it was Hamlin and Mike Edwards and Bishop, and it never materialized because of injuries. Hamlin more or less won the job by default in the summertime. I think he's going to make he being Sean McDermott, is going to make Cole Bishop earn that starting job. Damar Hamlin was not my favorite player, not the best safety in the NFL, but he was an adequate, serviceable free safety last year. And I think that Sean McDermott, just like with Max, everyone's talking about Max Harrison and Trey White. Everyone knows that's going to be a battle to watch.
Yep.
They're going to make Max Harrison earn it over Trey White. I think Cole Bishop's going to have to do the same with Damar Hamlin.
I couldn't agree more. And Bishop missed time in the spring as well with a minor injury. That is safety is very difficult in the NFL. There's a lot you have to understand. You can't afford to have any mental mistakes, especially in this defense. You have to be reliable against the pass and the run. Good player, but he's also only entering a second year, and that is a big responsibility. It would be irresponsible for the Bills to assume that he is ready for that spot, and they didn't do that. They brought back Hamlin. They brought in Forrest. So they wanted to make sure they had depth. And the same goes for corner. Yes, they love Maxwell Harrison. They want him to be the guy. But they brought back Trey White. You can argue with that decision all you want. I think part of it's culture. You wanted another experienced corner in that room with a couple of younger guys. Dane Jackson was brought back for his knowledge of the defense. So, no, it's a really good one. And that's one of the low-key or maybe the not-so discuss storylines that are definitely going to be more of a focal point once they put the pads on.
I should have asked you this earlier, but I'll ask you now while it's fresh in my mind so I don't completely forget before we're done talking here today. When it comes to covering the Bills and the Sabres, and again, training camp's going to be new for you, but you've been around the team for a bit now. You've written some stories, covered the team a little bit. You've kind of, I'm sure, have some sort of sense. Is there, and maybe I'm wrong, but is there a difference between organizations where, at least as a fan, as somebody on the outside who's not around the locker room every day, covering the Bills, it feels like, well, this part I know is right. The expectation is we're going to win. That's the expectation. We're supposed to win. We're going to win the AFC Championship this year. That's their expectation, and I feel like they believe that's what's going to happen. Whereas the Sabres, the organization is kind of like, I hope we win. You know what I mean? Like, do you get those vibes? Now, again, I could easily be wrong because I don't know the Sabres like you do, but is there a difference between expecting to be a great team and let's hope that we can end a playoff drought and get to the playoffs?
No, yeah, like the Bills, they have that standard. That is the standard. They have that expectation. They stick to it. And not only are they vocalizing that through the media, they're also following through with their actions. The Sabres have not followed through with their actions. What was it? 2 training camps ago, Kevin Adams stood in front of his entire team and said the time is now. Well, his actions didn't reflect that sentiment. They didn't do anything to replace Jack Quinn. They were completely silent the first couple months of the season when it was glaringly obvious to everybody watching that team they needed another forward. Their decor was a little bit better, but so I think it's just taken too long. That's one of the Sabres' primary issues, in my opinion. It's taken too long for Kevin Adams to diagnose the problems and understand the solutions. He's struggled with in-season trades. That is not a secret. Whether it be a complete lack of movement. Think back to the 13-game winless streak. He didn't do anything bad other than give a bad press conference, right? Didn't claim anybody on waivers. Nicolas Aube-Kubel, the day after the owner flies to Montreal to give the team a talk, Nicolas Aube-Kubel has a terrible turnover in the neutral zone. There's no accountability. So I think I think Lindy Ruff is somebody who can change this when it comes to the Sabres. But for the last couple of years, they've been all talk. There's been no follow through. And I think that lack of follow through when it comes to the management level, it leaks into your locker room. And it did. And those players, the counter argument could be, well, the players need to respond better to that. That's out of their control. They need to focus on what they can control. They do. But naturally, I think anybody who's ever been in a workplace and they're frustrated by factors that maybe aren't under control, it can be difficult when you see the problems, but nothing is being done about them. I think that some people can be encouraged that the Ryan McLeod trade was great. They went out and they got Jason Zucker last summer. That was a solid move. But for every 2 good moves, you have 4 that really make you raise an eyebrow. And you look at, all that talk about revamping that 4th line last year. Well, they bring in a guy this year to play on their 4th, this offseason, Danforth, Justin Danforth, good player. He's 5'9", Pat. That doesn't fit. That doesn't fit with the identity that you just stated. And I think that the one thing, I'm repeating what has been said for many years when it comes to the hockey team. But what Terry Pegula needs to understand is that when you pull the plug on the head coach, the way they did it with Granato, you got to make sure that the replacement, you built a team for one coach. You can't bring in somebody with a polar opposite approach and expect there to not be a transition. So through a series of mistakes, they've continued. That's why they've missed the playoffs this many years in a row. They continue to, when you change coaches, then you have players who don't fit with this next coach. You got to change over the roster. And when you have a general manager who's been challenged with making the moves during the season and has missed on pro acquisitions in the offseason, whether that be Sam Lafferty, Ilya Lyubushkin, Eric Johnson, Connor Clifton, it delays your trajectory. So although people are saying the right things, and whether it be Jarmo Kekalainen or Lindy Ruff, they've done some, Ryan McLeod, they've done some good things the last couple of years that would I guess from a fan base's perspective, inspire optimism. There's been also some shortcomings and some odd decisions that make you just wonder if they're going to be able to figure it out under this current plan.
Last question here for you today. I feel like through the years, this podcast has become kind of 3 layers. One of them is like today. I have someone on, and I feel like this is a really good conversation, a give and take, and I think people are going to really enjoy listening to your insight on both the Bills and the Sabres, the process, why, you switch jobs and all that stuff. So that's part of this show. Another part is when I talk and cover Bills. I feel like I have the ability to do it more objectively. I don't lose my mind as much. You know what I mean? The Sabres is a different animal, though, with me. I have admittedly over emotional, sometimes idiotic rants when it comes to this team because just the frustrated fan just comes out of me. Even if I don't want it to, sometimes it just does. When it comes to the Sabres here, circling back, if I have one big beef about this team right now, more than anything else, I got a lot of beefs, but the biggest one is this. All the stuff that we've talked about the last couple of years, the trades, things, this and that, even if you put all that to the side, this felt like with the cap space and this being the year, okay? You don't have to fire Kevyn Adams anymore. This is the last year of his contract. Lindy Ruff, the last year of his contract. Historic playoff drought. It felt like if there was ever going to be a summer where let's take chances, let's throw some caution to the wind, let's do whatever we got to do because whatever we've done before hasn't worked. You know, Lance, if you were, I don't know, let's say your boss says, you know, you're in danger of losing your job here. Yeah. You would start doing you would start coming up with creative. You would do what it took to keep your job, to make a change. It feels like with this team this season, this is almost feels like a slap in the face to fans, if I'm being honest. There is a lack of urgency. At least that's what it feels like to me and a lot of others too, when it comes to like how this team, what they're doing this summer. They make the Peterka trade. I get why. It makes sense. It might work out. But beyond that, where's the sense of urgency that says, hey, we are committed to doing everything and anything we possibly can to end this? It just doesn't feel that way.
Fair question. They didn't fire one assistant coach. They didn't make any changes to that coaching staff. Pat, you watched that penalty kill. You watched that power play. Yeah. You're telling me that you don't need any new voices in those rooms, especially when it's been well reported. I wrote a big story at the end of the season. The players were frustrated with Lindy's approach. There was obviously a disconnect between the players and Lindy for the first however many months of the season. So when you have that, the assistant coaches are the ones that usually need to bridge that gap. They're the ones who are, for lack of a better term, the good cops. Well, they didn't do that. They didn't do that. They were at least not effective in trying to do that, which really cost them their season. So you're not going to make any changes there. You know, you didn't do anything significant. And I wasn't on the beat in the offseason, but I knew when they made that Josh Norris trade, that was going to be their only significant move it forward for the next however many months. Like, that was their intention. Josh Norris is going to be our big piece for next season, a big piece who can't stay healthy, which, yeah. And that's, again, when it comes to Kevyn Adams' biggest mistake is going into each season hoping that 7 different things go right. Because if those 7 things go right, Pat, they're going to make the playoffs. You can't think that way. And you could argue, and I'm sure if I were talking to Kevyn Adams, his counterpoint was, well, every team has to do that. No, they don't. Not when they're relying on 19-year-old kids and 22-year-olds who were rushed to the league 3 years ago. It is a plan that made sense at the time when it came to getting Peterka and Quinn to the NHL. I would have kept Quinn in Rochester another year based on his struggles in the playoffs. Conversation for another day. But he hasn't been able to flip that switch with making them a contender. Urgency. And it really raises the question of how much is the owner to blame for the lack of progress, right? Because we could talk. We're sitting here. We're talking about coaching staff. They make a big move this summer. Why do they have this much cap space? You could point the finger at Terry Pegula. Is he giving Kevyn Adams? And the question has been asked over and over again in press conferences. And Kevyn Adams has been the good soldier. Terry Pegula gives us every resource possible. Well, no, he doesn't. If you're not spending toward the cap, and I understood. When they first flipped to this plan in 21-22, they didn't spend to the floor because they wanted to be younger. They wanted to develop at the NHL level because they had a coach they knew that could do that. Well, Lindy Ruff's not doing that. Lindy Ruff wants to win. They hired him to win. So then you gave Lindy Ruff a team with a bunch of these younger guys who still need to develop. It was short-sighted when they made the change. And yeah, you just have to wonder. And I've reported it. A lot of people reported it. Mm-hmm. Terry Pegula wanted Lindy Ruff. And there wasn't another person in the room who was able to convince him, well, Terry, although Lindy's a big winner, like this is what this is going to mean for our plan. This is what could happen. Even though Lindy's a great coach with all this experience, there's there might be a cost to pay here. And how do we explain that to the fans? And I think they've lost control of as the plan has evolved and as they've had to change. They've lost control of what the actual plan is. So you look at the roster moves this offseason, Pat. Yeah, they brought in a right-handed D, Kesselring, who I think is going to be the partner the Power needed. But the rest of it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And part of that, I think, has just been Kevin Adams has been so on the defensive in press conferences that he's not been able to properly explain what he's actually trying to do, which I think is they could use Lindy Ruff as a resource in that regard. But to be honest with you, I just see a team that lacks an identity other than what the coach. I just know what the coach wants them to do, but I don't see a team that has an identity with what it is.
Great insight. I really appreciate this conversation, Lance. I do. This was a
thank you. Not to interrupt, but I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about all of this because it's something I've just been sitting on the last couple of months with the change and everything. And it's exciting, but I also I wanted to be able to explain to people why.
And I'm glad you did because I think anything, whether it's sports media related, something significant happens, it's always good to have context. You know what I mean? If you're just like, yeah. Well, what the hell's going on, man? Lance is covering the Sabres. What? Now he's covering the Bills? What? Well, why? I appreciate you coming on and telling us why. I mean,
yeah. When I announced it, a lot of people were just assuming it's because the Sabres are bad.
Stink and the Bills are good.
I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I placed top 10 in AP and Associated Press Sports Editor awards for beat writing while covering a team with the longest playoff drought in NHL history. Like I don't need the team to be very good to do great work and advance my career. I think I've come a long way since I got here. I've proven that I don't need to cover a good team. It was for a lot of other reasons, and I'm gonna I'll miss it dearly. I already do. It was tough to sit on the sidelines during free agency and the draft, but I'm thrilled for what's next, the opportunity, and to prove that I can do this at the NFL level.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you offer the readers over at the Buffalo News, of course, alongside Jay, Ryan, and Catherine. I love Catherine too, by the way. It's funny. It just feels weird including you with that group now, but I am very much looking forward to it. Make sure you follow Lance on Twitter at Lysowski. Of course, check out and subscribe to the Buffalo News. Appreciate you, buddy.
Thank you, Pat. Talk soon.
All right, guys, I will be back. A brand new episode. Matt Moran from SB Nation joins me tomorrow.